may I ask you how you see Fouad Chehab's legacy?
Oh.
And not in a complicated way, more in a, is it net positive, net negative? How you see him and his role in state building?
I think one of the biggest misunderstandings in Lebanese history pertain to Fouad Chehab. Fouad Chehab, as a commander of the army in 1958, did pretty much nothing to stop the civil war, although he should have intervened to prevent Gamal Abdel Nasser from sending weapons to Beirut, because they did. And he did that because that was the only way for him to become president. So this is how he became president, by allowing the civil war to go on and on. And then Fouad Chehab, who wanted to become president again later in the 1960s, via the Deuxième Bureau, Al-Maktab Al-Thani, gave too much leeway to the Palestinians, because he understood at the time that the Christians were not going to vote for him. But he wanted, somebody to vote him back to office, and the way to do that was by getting the vote of the Muslim MPs. So the Maktab Al-Thani grew very, very weak on the Palestinians. And by the way, that's not me who said that. I'm almost quoting literally the memoirs of Sami al-Khatib. Sami al-Khatib, we all, I believe, know who Sami al-Khatib was. He was one of the most influential Chehabi officers, and he said our strategy to bring Fouad Chehab back to power was basically once we understood that the Christians were going all the way with the Halif at the time. Halif meaning Pierre Gemayel, Camille Chamoun, and Raymond Ede. He said we understood that the only way for Chehabist restoration, basically, by getting the Muslim vote. And to get the Muslim vote, you had to go lenient on the Palestinians, which is what we did. So I don't find anything good about how Fouad Chehab got to power in the first place, and certainly nothing good about how he tried to come back to power.
So the 6 years,
for me, the hero of Lebanon at the time in the 50s was Camille Chamoun, not Fouad Chehab. But we can go more into that if you want.
So the 6 years of Fouad Chehab's presidency to you does not leave an important footprint. It's more just trying to stay in power and negotiating endlessly with.
No. I'm not telling you I dislike Chehab. I dislike certainly, as I told you, I dislike how he came to power in the first place and how he tried to come back to power. That being said, while he was in power, Fouad Chehab certainly was not a fromagiste. He did not steal from the states. He was an honest man. So that's good. Fouad Chehab understood the importance of having a kind of socioeconomic program to lift up
a real national infrastructure project.
Yeah, and that's also good. Fouad Chehab built lots of state institutions that were needed. So I'm nuanced about Fouad Chehab. I don't think of him as the like the god of Lebanese nationalism or whatever you want to call it. I don't think I think he was a politician. He wanted power, and his way to power and his planned way to go back to power was very problematic. Fouad Chehab, for instance, did nothing about the slaughtering of Naim Ghabghab. That was the Shuf MP who was killed by the Jumblatis, and he was killed. I mean, he was basically, people stamped on him to death, and nothing happened. Fouad Chehab allowed, and I think that's national treason. There were officers in the army who in 1958 fought along the side of the people who were fighting with Abdel Nasser. And when the war stopped, he allowed them back into the army. So that's an officer in the Lebanese army fighting against the state. And then when the war stops, he's allowed back into the army. I mean, that's insane in my mind. So there's a lot of negative sides to Chehabism. Certainly, I don't like the Deuxième Bureau role in Lebanese politics. Certainly, he went too far in leaning toward Abdel Nasser. So I mean, there's more negative side than positive side, but there was some positive sides as well.
Nadim, could you comment as much as you can on Fouad Chehab's, whether it's a positive or negative legacy?
Okay, I don't want to go into historical revisionism. I'm not a fan of Chehab myself. I see him as part of a global phenomenon.
Military rule
from Latin America to Pakistan to Abdel Nasser to Iraq, Syria, Sudan, Numeiri, and then yes, and Gaddafi. So that was a fashion in the 60s. That's it. That's all I see. And the Americans favored military strongmen because they thought that democracy needs institutions, and the army is an institution builder. That's all I see.
So that's interesting. A common disliking of Fouad Chehab, maybe not for
No,
the same reasons,
I'm not disliking Fouad Chehab. I'm saying that I'm not part of this hagiography of Fouad Chehab, of the because I agree with all the Deuxième Bureau and his dislike of politics is not very democratic.
The reason I wanted to briefly touch on him is because that's the one name I think that is shared among civil society today, and the more right-leaning
out of ignorance.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
Let's give a round of applause.
Let me summarize.
The only man that tried gets a dual flagellation.
Let me summarize.
The one guy who tried. They used to call him Muhammad Chehab. Even that, it's he's dead. I like Fouad Chehab. I'm the only person.
Let me rescue you again.
Thanks, Nadim.
Let me summarize this whole historical revisionism debate. There are two sides. One side says that Lebanese history sucks and it's all conflicts and we all suffered and we should stop it and live separately, Maronistan and all this sort of thing. Enough is enough. I see it in the exact opposite way. I see it that as Hicham said, Lebanon was set up by the Maronites at a time when half the Maronites didn't want it. The Sunnis didn't want it, the Greek Orthodox didn't want it, the Druze didn't want it, and the Shias didn't want it. If you fast forward 100 years later, this has gone. They all want it now. Through different crises, after every crisis, the acceptance of Lebanon grows. So every crisis improves the cohesiveness, and the proof is, look at the Sunnis now. They're revising the period of the PLO and Abdel Nasser and all that, and they're more Lebanese nationalists than me, at least.
So we'll touch on identity.
Just to say that it is a very successful experiment that has moved positively over the last 100 years, rather than the description that it was a disaster from the start and it's moved, and everybody's victims, and because we are now in a situation which is unacceptable for everybody.